My boss fired me on a Thursday afternoon like I was a temp who'd spilled coffee on the copier, not the woman who'd practically run his company for over a decade. 12 years of streamlining operations, managing crises, training his revolving door of underqualified hires, gone in 7 minutes. And for what? So his 24-year-old nephew with a freshly printed business degree could bring new energy to the leadership team. Michael didn't even have the decency to look me in the eye when he said it. He leaned back in his chair like a man checking something unpleasant off a to-do list, said he appreciated my loyalty, and handed me a folder with HR's contact info. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just nodded once, stood up, and walked out of his glass-walled office with the same grace I'd carried myself with since the first day I stepped into that building. My name is Rebecca Martinez. I'm 45 years old. And I don't make scenes, I make moves. 12 years earlier, Michael's father had given me a chance when the company was still a scrappy little manufacturing outfit, renting 2 floors of a dusty building in West Chicago. I was their second operations manager in 6 months. The place was chaos. Orders went missing, inventory was mislabeled, employees were quitting mid-shift. I fixed it, quietly, efficiently, the kind of work that gets noticed by the people who actually pay attention. Michael was still in grad school back then. When his father passed the reins to him 5 years ago, I knew things would change. He had big ideas, most of them terrible, but I kept the place functional. I smoothed out his impulsive decisions, translated buzzwords into action, and kept the shop floor from imploding every time he brought in another consultant. And through it all, I kept my personal life private. I didn't drink with coworkers. I didn't gossip. What most people at the company didn't know was that I'd been investing in real estate for the last 7 years. Quietly, through a small investment group I co-founded with 2 friends, we bought commercial buildings, under-the-radar stuff. One of them, acquired just 6 months ago, was the very same building Michael's company leased for its operations. Of course, the LLC name on the lease had nothing to do with me. No one in the office ever connected the dots. Why would they? Rebecca from Ops didn't seem like the landlord type. I drove a 10-year-old Honda and packed my lunch. When I got home that day, I didn't scream into a pillow. I poured myself a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and pulled up the tenant lease folder. Michael had 63 business days left on his lease. And I had a plan. The next morning, while most people would still be nursing the sting of being kicked to the curb, I was reviewing lease clauses over black coffee and a bagel. My building, technically, West Point Commercial Holdings LLC, had acquired the property 6 months earlier in an all-cash deal. I'd led the due diligence myself. Ironically, I knew more about the building's sprinkler compliance history than Michael ever bothered to learn. His company, Halden Industries, occupied over 60% of the building's square footage. Their lease had a fixed term with no renewal clause, just an optional renegotiation window, which they had to trigger within the last 90 days. That window opened in 3 days. Funny timing. Even funnier, Michael had no idea I was now the person on the other side of that negotiation. The next week, I played the waiting game. I didn't reach out. I didn't tip my hand. I let the days tick by while I reviewed current market rates, ran comps, and consulted my partners. Industrial real estate was booming, and we were undercharging across the board. We agreed to a 40% increase across all new leases, unless, of course, a tenant had an exceptional employee retention record. That clause had been my idea. It was petty. It was brilliant. 3 days later, right on cue, our property manager received an email from Halden's procurement officer asking to schedule a meeting about the lease. I told her to book it. Then I requested to be present. New ownership, I explained. We prefer to review commercial renewals in-house. When I walked into that conference room 2 weeks later, Michael's jaw almost hit the table. Rebecca, he blinked, scanning the room like he thought he was dreaming. What are you doing here? I represent ownership, I said calmly, sliding into the seat across from him. West Point Commercial Holdings. We acquired this building last fall. You're our tenant. He looked like someone had yanked the floor out from under him. You own this building? I smiled. In a manner of speaking. His face flushed. He looked at the 2 people sitting beside him, his CFO and the company's lawyer, then back at me. You've been our landlord this whole time? I folded my hands. For a while now, yes. There was a long silence. I could practically hear the blood draining from his face. I let him sit in it before I opened my folder and continued. We're offering new lease terms to all tenants. Standard 40% increase in base rent. However, companies that meet our employee retention standards will qualify for a rate lock for 5 years. Michael's nostrils flared. That's extortion. I raised an eyebrow. That's market rate. You've been underpaying for years. We can't afford a 40% hike. He looked to his CFO, who was already frantically flipping through papers. You're giving us no notice. This isn't fair. I tilted my head. Neither is firing a senior manager with 12 years of experience and replacing her with your nephew who couldn't manage a lunch order without screwing it up. But life isn't always fair, is it? He opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. You don't qualify for the retention lock, I said. You let go of 4 senior staff in the last quarter. 2 of them were with you over 10 years. Michael sputtered. Rebecca, come on. You're doing this out of revenge. No, I said. I'm doing this as a business decision. But the irony? That's just a bonus. He leaned back, rattled. There has to be a way to work this out. I closed the folder in front of me and smiled. There is, I said. Hire me back. Not as an employee, as a consultant, project-based, retainer only, triple my previous salary. And Chad, he asked, already knowing the answer. I didn't even blink. You'll need to let him go. Budget constraints. He looked down, defeated. I could see the gears turning in his head. Specialized equipment. No time to relocate. No alternative facility ready. He was boxed in. And he knew it. I'll have legal draw up the new contract, I said, standing. You've got 7 business days to sign it if you want the retention lock. Then I walked out, heels echoing down the polished concrete hallway that, technically, belonged to me. 3 days later, the new consulting contract sat on my kitchen table. It was thicker than I expected. 12 pages, printed on heavyweight stock, bound with a cover sheet embossed with the Halden Industries logo. A little much for a document born out of desperation. But then again, Michael always did like dressing up his disasters in shiny paper. I skimmed the terms. Monthly retainer, triple my former salary. Flexible hours, autonomy over any operational restructuring. No reporting hierarchy. 6-month minimum with automatic renewal unless terminated with 60 days notice. In other words, carte blanche. He needed me back, and now he was willing to pay. I signed it in blue ink, slowly, deliberately. Then I scanned the final page and sent it back through my private LLC email. 10 minutes later, his reply landed in my inbox. Just one line. Welcome back, Michael. No smiley face, no pleasantries, no warmth, just cold acceptance. I'd expected as much. That Monday, I returned to the building, not as an employee, but as an outside consultant. No security badge, no cubicle. I walked straight into the conference room where Michael had once fired me and began my first audit. The staff looked stunned when I showed up. Some avoided my eyes, others whispered in the hallway. A few gave me respectful nods, the ones who knew how the company really ran before it went off the rails, but no one dared say anything out loud. Chad, on the other hand, was visibly agitated. He passed me in the hallway that afternoon, arms full of boxes. His face was flushed and tight. You know this is personal, right? He snapped. I paused and looked him dead in the eyes. No, Chad, this is professional. That's the part you never understood. He left the building that day with his AirPods in and ego shattered. No goodbye party, no announcement, just gone. By Friday, I'd already delivered my first set of recommendations, streamlined workflows, eliminated redundant vendor contracts, and reduced weekly overhead by 18%. I was worth every cent of that inflated paycheck, and Michael knew it. He never said thank you, just nodded whenever I spoke, jaw tight, hands clenched, like each word from me cost him oxygen. But he followed my suggestions, every single one. 2 weeks later, we had our first formal meeting with the entire executive team. Michael introduced me as our operations advisor. Careful to avoid the word consultant, probably because it stung. I smiled politely through the meeting, offering insights with surgical precision. People listened. They took notes. For the first time in years, the office felt efficient. On my way out that afternoon, I stood by the front doors and looked around the lobby. The same floors I'd walked on for over a decade. The same glass walls. The same reception desk. But everything had changed. They didn't own me anymore. I did, however, own them. Literally and metaphorically. In my inbox later that evening was another message from Michael. Let's talk next week about expanding your scope. I want you involved in our strategic planning retreat. I laughed, alone in my condo. Then I poured a glass of wine and opened the lease tracking dashboard for the building. 4 other tenants had reached out asking about renewal options. 3 of them met my retention standard. I offered each of them a 5-year rate lock, slightly below market but secure. The 4th, a startup notorious for overworking staff and burning through junior developers, I offered them a 35% hike. Take it or leave it. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about control, strategy, leverage, and I'd never felt more calm. A month into my new role, things had settled into a rhythm that was almost surreal. I wasn't punching a clock. I wasn't stuck in endless approval chains. I walked into that building whenever I pleased, answered to no one, and left as soon as my job was done. It wasn't just a return, it was an upgrade, a transformation. And everyone could feel it. The senior staff, the ones who'd survived the Chad restructure, started coming to me with questions. Quiet ones, in the hallway or by the elevator, like they were testing the waters. Rebecca, do you have a second? Hey, off the record, what do you think about the new vendor system? I always gave them straight answers. No politics, no posturing, just truth, the way I always had. Only now, they listened harder, took notes faster, because now I wasn't just ops. I was the person who'd turned the tables on the CEO and was being paid handsomely for it. Michael, meanwhile, was unraveling slowly. He still had the corner office and the title, but the authority had shifted. Every time we spoke, he looked like a man waiting for a trapdoor to open under his feet. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. That Thursday, I was reviewing logistics contracts when I got a call from another landlord in the district, someone I knew from a past real estate deal. You still leasing to Halden? He asked, casually. Yep, I said. Why? Got a call from their procurement team. Quiet inquiries about available space. Looks like someone's trying to explore an exit. I smiled into the phone. Let me guess. No one else has availability that fits their specs on short notice? Bingo. Not without major retrofitting. You've got them boxed in, huh? Just business, I said. After the call, I sat back and stared out the window. The truth was, Michael was feeling the walls close in. He was stuck in a building he couldn't afford to leave, on a lease he couldn't renegotiate without my consent, paying premium rates to the same person he tried to discard like outdated equipment. That weekend, I met with my real estate partners. We reviewed our long-term strategy for the property. We should think about selling, one of them suggested. The developer who approached us last quarter just increased their offer, 30% higher. I shook my head. Not yet. But why not cash out while the market's hot? Because leverage like this doesn't come around often, I said, and it's worth more than a few extra zeros. They didn't argue. Instead, I drafted a new leasing framework for the building. Tenant scorecards, retention bonuses, discounted renewals for companies that offered competitive salaries and benefits. I was turning the place into a quiet fortress of employee respect. By Tuesday, word had started to spread. 2 companies down the hall from Halden reached out to say thanks for the fair renewal terms. One of the directors even invited me to lunch. You're not like most landlords, she said. I used to be on the other side of the table, I replied. By the end of the month, Halden's new lease, with the increased rate and special consultant clause, went into effect. Michael signed it with the stiff posture of a man who just swallowed his own pride whole. He didn't speak to me for 2 days. Then came the email. We're experiencing budget constraints. Need to revisit some line items. Can we discuss reducing consulting hours? I replied 10 minutes later. Happy to reduce consulting hours, but per Clause 3B, that would void your eligibility for the 5-year rate lock. Standard rent increase would apply starting next quarter. He didn't write back. The next morning, I walked into the building lobby and the receptionist greeted me with a wide smile. Morning, Miss Martinez. I smiled back. Morning. As I stepped into the elevator, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Calm, composed, and, for the first time in years, completely in control of my own narrative. And Michael? He was still in his glass office upstairs, trying to lead a company he no longer had the confidence to fully command. answering emails in a building he didn't realize he could never really escape from. Because every time he opened his office window or stepped into the hallway, he was on my turf. And that wasn't going to change anytime soon. 3 months after I returned as a consultant, Halden Industries looked very different. The chaos Chad had created was mostly undone. Vendor relations had stabilized, production timelines were back on track. I'd trimmed waste, eliminated middlemen, and optimized logistics to levels the company hadn't seen in years. Even the floor supervisors, the ones who used to call me the fixer, had started to refer to me with a new title: the one who came back stronger. I wasn't gunning for credit, I was just doing what I'd always done. Except this time, I got paid what I was worth. And more importantly, I wasn't under anyone's thumb. Every invoice I sent to Michael's finance team reminded him of that. One Wednesday morning, his CFO, Diana, asked to meet me privately. She was always polite, maybe the only exec I still respected over there. She closed the door behind her and dropped her voice to a whisper. Off the record, he's trying to figure out how to get out of the lease. He's contacted 2 commercial brokers, asked about subletting. I raised an eyebrow. And, she exhaled, no takers, not unless they gut and rebuild half the infrastructure. That's what happens, I said, when you customize a building for niche equipment and don't own the property. He's embarrassed, she said. More than that, he's unraveling. Chad's parents called last week. Apparently Michael never told them why their son got fired. I didn't react. I just reached for my coffee. She hesitated before continuing. You're not just a thorn in his side. You're a mirror. Every time you walk into this building, you remind him what real leadership looks like. I gave her a tight smile. I'm not here for that. I'm here to keep this place running. Yeah, she said softly. That's the part that stings most. Later that week, Michael requested a meeting. First time in over a month. When I stepped into the room, he didn't even bother standing. Just gestured to the chair across from him. His sleeves were rolled up, tie loosened. He looked tired. I wanted to talk, he started, about this arrangement. I stayed silent. I think we got off on the wrong foot, he said. What happened? The way you left before? It wasn't personal, it was just a bad call. That's generous, I said flatly. He looked down. The truth is, I thought bringing Chad in would make things easier. Younger face, cheaper salary, someone I could mold. Someone who wouldn't question you, I corrected. He didn't argue. I thought loyalty came from familiarity, from being nice to people. I didn't understand that real loyalty is earned when you trust someone to handle the tough stuff. I folded my arms. What exactly are you trying to say, Michael? He looked up, finally meeting my eyes. I want you to come back, permanently, senior VP, full control of ops again. I'll double your old salary. It was quiet for a long moment. Then I smiled, slow and deliberate. No. He blinked. No? You don't get to fire me to hire your nephew and then buy your way back into comfort, I said. I'm not interested in job titles anymore. I've built something bigger than this company. I don't need a desk upstairs to prove my worth. But this isn't about revenge, Michael, I interrupted. It's about boundaries. I own the building. I control the terms. I work when I want, how I want, and I leave when I'm done. You don't get to package that up into a corner office and call it progress. He looked stunned. No one had probably ever told him no without fear in their voice, but I wasn't afraid of him. Not anymore. I stood up. Send over the next project when you're ready. And if not, no hard feelings. I've got other clients lined up. Before I left the room, I turned back just once. You know what the real irony is, Michael? He looked up. The person you fired because you thought she cost too much turned out to be the only one who could afford to save your company. And with that, I walked out. By the end of the fiscal year, Michael had fully swallowed his pride, or maybe just choked on it quietly behind closed doors. He renewed my consulting contract without hesitation. In fact, he didn't even try to renegotiate the rate, just signed it and slid it back across the table, like a man who knew exactly what it cost to keep his walls from collapsing. I was still billing triple my former salary, now with performance bonuses tied to quarterly KPIs, which, of course, I kept exceeding. Halden Industries became profitable again, leaner, smarter, steadier. The kind of company investors start to notice. The kind of company that, on paper, made Michael look competent. He took the credit, naturally. That's what people like him do. But the employees knew, the vendors knew. Even the union reps who used to dread his leadership started requesting my presence in negotiations. And I showed up, not because I had to, but because I knew exactly what a company looked like when it forgot the people who held it together. That wasn't going to happen again. Not on my watch. One afternoon in early spring, I stood outside the building, watching a delivery truck back into the loading bay. The air smelled like cut metal and warm concrete, a familiar hum of industry. Diana stepped outside with 2 coffees. Figured you'd still be here. Old habits, I said, accepting the cup. We stood there in silence for a moment before she spoke again. Do you ever regret not taking the job back? Not once. She nodded like she'd expected the answer but needed to hear it anyway. He's scared of you, you know. Good. She laughed. No, I mean it. The board's been asking more questions lately. Michael's been deflecting like crazy, but they're not buying it. People know where the real backbone of this place is. I sipped my coffee. The truth has a way of leaking through the walls. You think they'll push him out? If they do, it won't be because I asked for it. And if they don't, I shrugged, then I keep doing what I do best, building things that last, with or without him. She looked at me for a long moment, then said quietly, You know, when you got fired, most of us thought you'd disappear. We didn't realize you'd come back holding the deed to the entire damn building. I smiled. Neither did Michael. That weekend, I reviewed offers from 2 national tenants who'd heard about my employee-first leasing model. Word had gotten out that this building wasn't just well located, it was well run. They wanted long-term deals. I countered with tenant protections, built-in COLA adjustments, and optional buy-in to a community childcare credit program. One of the VPs called me personally to say, This is the first time we've seen a landlord prioritize employee stability. We're in. It was working. The idea that a building could be more than square footage, that it could be an ecosystem. By summer, we were at 98% capacity. Halden Industries, of course, remained the anchor tenant, locked into a 5-year rate freeze they had to fight to qualify for. And Michael? Well, I started to notice a pattern. Whenever he passed me in the hall, he'd nod, stiff and silent. Not quite afraid, but not comfortable either. And once, just once, I caught him lingering by the lobby window, staring out at the building's name etched in bronze above the doors. West Point Commercial Holdings. He never asked who came up with the name, but I think deep down he already knew. 6 months after that conversation with Diana, I was sitting in my home office, feet up, coffee in hand, skimming a lease summary for a new tenant, when I got a message from one of the partners in my real estate group. It was short, direct. You built something rare. Just wanted to say it's been an honor to watch you work. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I leaned back and let the moment settle. This whole journey, being discarded, underestimated, replaced, then returning not with vengeance but with leverage, had shifted something fundamental in me. I hadn't just taken revenge. I'd redefined my role, not just in Michael's company, but in my own life. That's what power really is. Not shouting, not suing, not burning everything down. Just quietly taking the seat at the head of the table that was always mine to begin with. Michael never apologized, not once. But he learned to respect the silence I carried when I walked into a room. That calm authority, that lack of desperation, that unshakable stillness. And honestly, I didn't need an apology. His face every time he had to sign another check with my name on it said more than any words ever could. Some of the staff still came to me, not just for work issues, but for advice, career decisions, mentorship. They'd seen the whole arc, from betrayal to balance, and they understood now that loyalty isn't about staying silent when you're wronged. It's about knowing your worth and acting on it. One afternoon, one of the younger managers pulled me aside in the elevator. You give the rest of us hope, he said. I blinked. Hope? He nodded. That we're not crazy for working hard, that it matters, that someday, people like us win. I smiled. You don't need to win loud to win well. He didn't get it at first, but he will. They always do. Eventually, even Michael started copying my ideas, quietly rolling out some of the policies I'd built into our leasing system, retention perks, wellness initiatives, flexible work programs. He never gave me credit, but that was fine. Everyone else knew where they came from. And the board? Well, Let's just say the last time they asked me to speak at the quarterly strategy meeting, I opened with a line that I'd kept tucked away for years. Sometimes the best thing you can do for a company is to let it try and survive without you. There were no interruptions after that. Not long ago, I was locking up my office for the weekend when Diana passed me in the hallway. "You ever think about selling?" she asked. "You'd walk away a very rich woman." I considered it. Then I shook my head. "No, I like knowing I built something no one can take from me," she smiled, spoken like someone who's finally free. As I stepped outside, the wind was warm, brushing through the trees that lined the parking lot. Somewhere behind me, the machines of Halden hummed steadily, same as ever. But the power had moved. Quiet, strategic, permanent. And that's how I learned that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just waits, watches, buys the building, and then rents it back, at full market rate, to the man who once thought I was disposable. And that's how I learned that real power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just signs the lease and waits for the rent to come due. Has something like this happened to you? Share your story in the comments. Subscribe to EN Reddit's story for new real-life revenge tales every day, and send this to a friend who loves karma.